But I'm here to moderate the second roundtable of the day, and a really exciting debate is promised and discussion is promised. Please be sure to prepare yourself for the question and answer session. Our panel roundtable discussion is on the theme of embedding social justice in EU climate and sustainability governance. My name is Claire Dupont. I'm a professor at Ghent University and visiting researcher at Dublin City University, a member of the GreenDeal-NET network, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. I'm going to introduce each of our speakers very quickly, and then we will move as soon as we can into the discussion. So I'm not going to take too much time reading out the long and very illustrious and fascinating biographical information from everybody here, but I'll do my best to do justice to everyone. So I have Dr. Louis Florin. Over here, you can wave, yes. Louis is a postdoctoral researcher at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, and he works in the Socio-Environmental Dynamics Research Group, SONIA for short, it's a very nice acronym, where he's contributing to and coordinating a Lamartra research project which looks at the governance strategies to bridge ecological and labour transitions. So a certain expert, definitely an expert for our discussion today. And we have also Dirk Berresheim, sitting here, who is a member of the Workers Group 2 at the European Economic and Social Committee and head of the EU Liaison Office for IG Metall. He's a prominent figure in European labour relations, and he serves as the head of this Liaison Office for IG Metall, which is actually Europe's largest trade union with over 2.2 million members. In this capacity, he represents the union's interests within European institutions, advocating for workers' rights and industrial policies. We also have Mags Bird on the panel. Mags Bird is a senior policy officer for just transition within the climate and energy team at the WWF European Policy Office. She holds a postgraduate certificate in climate change and energy from the University of Antwerp and an MSc in development management from the London School of Economics, and previously worked in humanitarian aid. And then I have Pavle over here. I hope I did that okay. Pavle is a policy officer at the European Commission in the Directorate General for Regional and Urban Policy. He works within the Smart and Sustainable Growth Unit responsible for the coordination of the Just Transition Fund, which I think will answer some questions raised earlier. And this is a key initiative aimed at supporting communities as they transition towards a climate-neutral economy. And online we have Ganzleben, who is the she leads the unit on sustainable and fair transitions at the European Environment Agency. Dr. Ganzleben manages a diverse team of senior experts who track progress towards sustainability in Europe, assess mechanisms to enable change in our core production and consumption systems, and explore how costs and benefits are distributed across society. And she has a DPhil in economic geography from Oxford University and a postdoctoral program in urban ecosystems from the United Nations University. So plenty of expertise sitting in this panel, and we are really keen to learn from you all and engage in a discussion on the theme of embedding social justice into sustainability governance in the EU. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask each of you in turn if you wouldn't mind taking just 2 minutes to explain to our audience today how you or your organization engage with the theme of social justice. And I'm going to ask Catherine if you wouldn't mind being the first to speak. How does the EA and how do you engage with social justice?
Super, thank you so much, Claire. Can I just confirm you can hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Hurrah. Super. So, what do we do at the European Environment Agency? Essentially, we build knowledge to support policy making on environment and climate, and that's both to evaluate implementation, but also evidence to support new policies. So, in the field of social justice, we have 3 threads of work. First is focused on the distribution of environmental risks to health, and here I'm talking about air pollution, noise. We call this unequal exposure, unequal impact, and we look at both the distribution of environmental risks, but also the vulnerability of different communities. And we really see that poorer communities are exposed to higher levels of pollution. Second, we look at justice in the context of climate change adaptation. We just recently published a report, Social Fairness in Preparing for Climate Change, really making the point that justice is a key principle in climate change adaptation, that the action must be deliberate and deliberately inclusive, otherwise adaptation efforts might exacerbate existing inequality. And we looked at 4 systems: urban, agriculture and food, water and transport. And our third area of work is really looking at the process of systems change. And there we published a report in 24 on just sustainability transitions from concept to practice, where we looked at how you ensure fairness in transitions at different levels of governance. And we provide case studies at national, local and regional level from Spain, from Finland, from Belgium, looking at how practitioners have woven aspects of justice into change, and really then highlighting tools for policymakers to better govern transitions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I heard your alarm, so you were very well on time. It was excellent. Pavle, may I turn to you and ask you the same question? How do you engage with social justice in your work?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for this invitation. And in fact, the European Commission represents the European Regional Development Department, so we co-manage together with member states cohesion policy. One of the part of this cohesion policy, which is also part of the Green Deal, is Just Transition Fund. So, in fact, it's Just Transition Fund. It's translation of the social justice into concrete actions. So it means that the fund was set up as part of the Green Deal to mitigate the social, economic, and environmental effects of the transition towards the climate neutral economy. So concretely, what do? We support member states. We design together with them the territorial just transition plans, which are some kind of master plan for the transition of the territories, and then we help them to implement these plans, implement just transition plans, to support with expertise, together with academics, with the stakeholders from academia, from other like trade unions. We are in constant dialogue in order to improve the implementation on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavle. May I turn to you, Louis?
Hi. Thank you, Claire, for the invitation. I'll start by insisting how my work relates to the topic of the day. Coming from a research background on labor relations and social protection and social economic governance, I have to precise that my work takes kind of a reverse approach to the question. It's rather how to integrate environmental and climate issues within socio-economic and labor governance. But ultimately, it's the question of integration of these objectives that we will discuss today. And that's what we have tried to do in the research project that Claire mentioned, Lamartine project, where we studied governance strategies to achieve both climate targets and just work and employment opportunities. And more specifically, based on the case of Belgium, we studied the role of social dialogue and how it could evolve to ensure the joint pursuit of those social, economic, and climate targets. And I think it connects a lot with points that were raised today in this morning panel. In terms of integration of these objectives, it seems that the common policy frame integrating climate targets and social objectives is widely shared. It's referred to in the European Green Deal itself, with pledges to leave no one behind. The concept of just transition that has percolated from the labor union movement and been mainstreamed in EU policymaking. And of course, what's at stake is that the vagueness of the term allows for multiple actors to take it on board without compromising their core interest, and so to move forward beyond the integration in the policy frame. It seems that more work needed towards integration within the policy processes and institutions to avoid fragmentation of social justice decision-making on the one hand and climate justice decision-making on the other hand. So I'm looking forward to discuss this all with you today.
Thank you. Mads, if I can ask you then the same question about how WWF engages with social justice. Thank you. Is this one working okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Great. So, as Claire said, I work in the WWF in our European Policy Office, and so we work on the EU policy front to further WWF's global mission, which is to build a future in which people live in harmony with nature. And WWF recognises climate change as one of the most urgent and largest threats to biodiversity and the nature that we have left. And so increasingly over recent years has been working also on climate and energy policy for this holistic approach. And within that, our work on just transition started very much in looking at the the fossil fuel phase out and the sort of classic just transition conundrum about then what happens to the people and how do we really manage that rapid phase out, also from a perspective just of practicality, how to get it done, and you need a fairness in there. And it's broadened over the years, so now we work on the territorial just transition, we look at the just transition fund, the just transition mechanism, which Pavle talked about, but we're also looking at other aspects of climate and energy policy and where the whole of society approach to fairness is, both in terms of sort of the social acceptance of climate and energy policy, which is obviously a hot topic at the moment, but also in terms of the effectiveness of getting done this rapid transition that we need, and that if we don't have a socially inclusive, very fair transition, we won't actually get the deep transition that we need. So recently, concretely, we've been looking at the NECPs, the National Energy and Climate Plans, looking at where just transition, where we're at in terms of embedding just transition in that as an example of sort of governance frameworks. We're also looking at social climate plans at the moment. Jan mentioned that the Social Climate Fund. So those are the sort of concrete files, as well as, if you like, continuing to build the cross-cutting narrative that we need about the connections between social fairness and environmental issues. Thank you. Thank you. Dirk.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm representing here the European Economic and Social Committee, which is often called the House of Civil Society in Europe. We are an advisory body to the lawmakers, the Commission, Parliament, and the Council. And we are put together from different groups, the employers, the trade unions that I'm representing there, and other forms of organized civil society, including the environmental groups. The ESC has a long-standing tradition of dealing both with sustainability aspects and that of social justice. And we have been putting these two aspects together also, I think, also since decades, but obviously also in the context of a just transition, where we have developed several opinions in the context also of the Belgian presidency of the Council, and developed together with the three groups, which is kind of difficult from time to time, as you can imagine, some guiding principles on how a just transition can be done, that it must be inclusive, that we strengthen the role of collective bargaining in this process, and recently on an opinion where we developed the necessity for a policy package for the world of work in the European Union context, calling, for example, for necessary mapping of the just transition needs in the different regions. I think there the aspect that has been mentioned in the report by Enrico Letta, the other Italian Prime Minister, that has sometimes been neglected in the discussion, that we should also very much focus on the right to remain for people in the region and give them a perspective there. And among others, also the question there, of course, of requalification of people. That is the key issues that we are dealing with currently. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this also shows exactly the breadth and scope of working on social justice and sustainability issues that we see across the institutions and research community. And so it's really exciting to have all of you together in this one panel. I'm going to be posing questions to you in turn. You can, of course, please jump in if you want to answer a question that I asked someone else, and we will be keeping time at the end for questions from the audience. So hold on for the moment while we get through these ones first. Louis, I want to start with you. You're here from the research side. Perhaps you can enlighten us. What exactly does social justice mean?
All right, thanks. Based on my work, I will focus on a specific dimension of social justice, which is the procedural dimension, and then I can move on to other dimensions. And I think it will connect also well to this morning panel. In a procedural way, I would say that social justice is the result or the output of policies that have been based on inclusive and representative decision-making processes. And the importance of this procedural and inclusive aspect of social justice is also recognized in EU policymaking. There was the Council recommendation on ensuring a fair transition towards climate neutrality that recognized the role that social partners and organized civil society play in managing this transition and the role they play in the governance of this transition. And there's the participatory process of civil society, including civil society and stakeholders. For example, the consultation process on national energy and climate plans that we discussed also this morning, with of course the difficulties that appear in the discrepancies in the implementation, whether it's only a tick boxing exercise or whether it's a really full-scale inclusive approach that has a meaningful policy impact. To move back to the more, I would say, substantive definition, I would say that nowadays the main challenge is that it's not just about distributive issues between, for example, capital and labor, but also it extends to the distribution of environmental risks and opportunities, as also was discussed earlier. And additionally, the question of justice extends over time. It's not only about immediate distributive effects and questions, but also the question of the sustainability of these arrangements, issues of intergenerational justice, etc. And so, for really a more specific definition of social ecological justice, I think I can refer to work by a colleague from ULB, Aurore Fransolet. They developed a social ecological justice compass that also can be used in the design of policies, but also in the evaluation of policies, and that really define the different dimensions of social ecological justice.
Thanks a lot. That's really interesting already. I think it would be great to hear now from Catherine, if you wouldn't mind, because you also mentioned to us several reports that the agency has been presenting. So how would you rate from that work the state of the embeddedness of social justice and sustainability in Europe today?
Yes, thank you, Claire. That's a big question, of course. We do have many policies in place to secure social justice in Europe. We have the European Pillar of Social Rights. Pavle mentioned the Just Transition Mechanism and the cohesion policy, which explicitly look at addressing unequal economic development across Europe, and the Just Transition Mechanism. I think there are many examples of successful support. For example, in Spain has been very successful in using that mechanism. In response to energy costs and energy poverty, we now have the Social Climate Fund, which is, of course, at very early stages. We're looking now for the member states to produce their first plans as to how they'll implement that in practice. And then I would say maybe from a more environmental perspective, looking at how the burden of pollution falls on society. We have the polluter pays principle, whereby the polluter should pay the cost of the burden of their pollution on society. It doesn't always work out like that, right? If you're in Belgium, if we think of the example of the PFAS pollution in Antwerp, I would say that the compensation that's been paid has not covered the cost of that PFAS pollution around the 3M industrial site. But we have the Commission is now within the context of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive looking at putting costs on the upstream chemical industry and pharmaceutical industry that put chemicals into the water to secure clean drinking water, and we have the Environmental Liability Directive. Now, having said all of that, we've had this change now in Europe, of course, towards the competitiveness compass, and what we would urge is that the understanding of competitiveness is one that does not just look at short-term competitiveness, ultimately the price at which goods can be produced, but it really has a broader understanding of the social and environmental resilience that underpins our economy, and the need to have healthy workers who are not exposed to pollution, and a society that is resilient to climate change so that our industrial production is not beset by significant climate risks. In the context of the Clean Industrial Deal, which again is quite technocratic in its language, the social focus falls very much on job creation, quality job creation through boosting clean tech, which is something that we very much support. But I think there are questions about where jobs are going to be lost in Europe, what regions the jobs are going to be lost in, and whether they're the same regions in which jobs will be created. And I think that they're probably not going to be the same regions. And so there's still going to be this need to redress that unequal distribution of opportunity. I would stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I think this is very interesting given some of the other discussions that we've been having today. And I want to turn now immediately to Pavle, actually, because one of the comments here that was raised by Catherine was this idea of unequal opportunities and the potential job losses also in this transition. So I wanted to ask, can you tell us a bit more about how the EU is supporting communities that are facing socioeconomic challenges because of the transition to carbon neutrality?
Yes. In fact, we realize that the impact of the climate transition will be unequal. European Commission set up the Just Transition Mechanism, Just Transition Fund, in order to address this effect in territories that are the mostly affected by the coal phase out, by the transition toward the climate decarbonization of steel, cement industries, and together with member states we identified this more or less 100 territories, tiny territories, very narrow, the most vulnerable, and we in fact focused 20 billion of just transition to these territories, and this fund is in fact to in a nutshell that nobody is left behind. It means that the coal miners, the power, energy power workers or steel mills workers are, for example, reskilled, upskilled in order to find the new clean jobs. And we realized that this fund accelerate coal phase out in many regions, in many countries like Romania, Czechia, in some regions of Poland, or sometimes triggered this transition. So it was the positive effect. Another aspect of this fund is focusing on the dialogue with stakeholders. In fact, because we, as part of cohesion policy, the partnership principle, the involvement of partners in designing, in managing this fund is important. Why? Because they know better what are the challenges of the territories, what are the needs, what are kind of project they wanted to select in order to help them to overcome this problem. So together with stakeholders, we work very closely. They design this master plan of transition, like territorial just transition plans, and then the members of the monitoring committees, of the working groups working on the selection criteria, how many points you can get for this kind of, for the other kind of feature of the project, in order to select the best project that will serve them to exactly to, for example, upskill, reskill, to decontaminate the land, or to create new jobs. So that's the spirit, the partnership, the acceleration of coal phase out, but not only decarbonization and focusing on the most vulnerable territories.
Thank you so much. Dirk, may I ask you to come in on this conversation about what you think of the state of European success in integrating social and environmental aspects?
Yes, I think I can directly jump in on the question of the Just Transition Fund, which I think has its strengths when it comes to defining or looking at regions where you really have a phase out of a certain industry, which is definitely the case in the coal mining. I mean, we all know that there is, if in a decarbonized world, we do not want to use coal anymore, so it doesn't make any sense to do coal mining. Does it make sense to abandon, in a consequence, mining totally? We are not that sure anymore with the global circumstances that we have, and we need for the energy transition a lot of raw materials that in sometimes you also find in the same region. So there you're not defining a just transition in a way that a job ends and you have to find a new opportunity, then that you rather have a change within this job. And this is true for most of the sectors that we are in. When I look at the necessary transition in the car industry, for example, it is clear we will have a transition into electromobility. If I look at the chemical industry, there is a lot of decarbonization going on. When I look, you mentioned the example of the steel industry. It's not about getting rid of steel production in Europe, it's about changing steel production. And there I think the fund has some limitations in it. As general, the policy tools that we have at the European level do have their limitations also in other instruments in regional aspects where we have. And one of the deficits that we have seen in the Fit for 55 package at the time, which still is the package which is in place. I mean, the Clean Industrial Deal, it's all about words currently. It's not like real thing. There the main deficit was, from our perspective, that you did have the just transition in the overarching umbrella communication on the Fit for 55 package. You had them in the JTF and the Social Climate Fund, but it was not being too specific. And I think we have to rework on that coming to the Clean Industrial Deal, but I'm over the time, I see.
Thank you. I'm going to take up on some of those points, but I'm going to ask Mags if you could maybe reflect on this. But the question I want to ask you is more about how we understand social justice and environmental issues and how they're integrated, because it seems, even in this discussion, that a certain understanding of what social justice means is that just transition, or is it protecting those already vulnerable? That influences how policies then are designed. So what do you think about the importance of thinking about social justice and environmental issues together?
We're often asked, even at WWF, why we put social and environmental issues together and how we do that. And I think the question I would put back is, well, why would you disconnect things which are inherently connected? Because and it also depends a little bit from the perspective that you're looking at it from. As human beings, especially as scientists, academics, we're very good at picking things apart, and the tricky bit is putting it all back together again, and that also applies to the policy sphere and to the sort of way we manage things in silos. But if we look at it from a local perspective, like a geographical lens, like the Just Transition mechanism is a very good example. The coal phase out, it's not just about climate change and decarbonisation, it has immediate social impact. So you can't separate the two, or you won't be making your transition effective if you try to split these things apart. And that applies at a household level. If we look at things like energy poverty or air pollution, it's not just about environment, it's about health and well-being. So if we're not sort of leaning on everything we know about the social side of things, about how we assess who's most vulnerable, who's being left out, what our social protection tools are, if we're not integrating that bit into the conversation and we're just looking for the sort of environment side or the technical fixes, then we're not going to get the job done, and we're not going to make the change for the people. And I think it's also, we separate things because sometimes we're frightened to talk about the environment or climate now. I mean, Jan in his keynote speech said, people are sick of hearing about this. They don't want climate policy. But actually, that's not entirely true. There's a lot of research out there that says people still very much as citizens in the EU really care about climate change, and they are scared for their children. It's just they're also really worried about the cost of living, and they don't have confidence in their governments to actually make the policies that are making the shift. So I think we need to be able to put those things back together and talk about them. And I promise I'll stop talking now, but it comes back to the adaptation thing as well. Everyone's cool on adaptation. It's a really nice common ground. It's a unifying factor across the political spectrum in a way that climate mitigation is no longer. But actually, from many perspectives, it's the same thing. So great, let's have a very strong climate adaptation plan which insulates all our houses, because that's going to do mitigation as well. And let's not make the two fight against each other. Let's keep up the sort of rapid, urgent mitigation actions. We need to bring down the emissions. We need to do the adaptation at the same time, but they're not conflicting things, and we run a lot of risks if we set them up in opposition to each other. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think that's also part of the understanding from what we're doing. Part of the work in GreenDeal-NET is about integration and how we can assess it and how we can measure it and how we can promote it. And it's also something that we've seen as a challenge in the EU more broadly forever, I would say. Louis, from a research perspective, can you identify barriers that are preventing us from having a better holistic integrated approach on social and environmental affairs? And we can talk about many other issues, but let's stick to those ones for now.
Yes, I think it will connect also to what my colleague just said before. One of the main barriers first is that we have a tendency to disconnect things to technically separate, and then that explains, for example, the way the just transition has been operationalized so far. It's mainly through compensation mechanism. Protecting workers or communities from environmental policies. And so in an integration perspective, this operationalization remains too limited at different levels. First, it's because it's centered on climate mitigation policies, and as we just said, there's also the issues of climate adaptation, biodiversity protection and restoration, etc. The second point is that compensation and restorative justice or immediate distributive issues justice is one of the way we can look at justice, but we should also move beyond the compensatory logic with a broader social ecological transition project. And there we can also build on institutions and processes of procedural integration of the stakeholders and the civil society and social partners to govern the transition. And that's also what it's not black or white. That's what we hear also with the co-management of the fund with stakeholders. That's what I would say. And then on the more substantial barriers and challenges, I feel like there are issues that act both as challenges and potential drivers. For example, geopolitical tension can be a barrier in the sense of the increase of military budgets, for example, has to be compensated to reduction of other budgets that might have been used for social and environmental issues. But on the other hand, as was said also earlier today, these geopolitical tensions can be used to push the EU towards the reduction of fossil fuel consumption to achieve a greater strategic autonomy. So I would say that beyond the ecological imperative for the transition, ongoing trends in such as geopolitical tensions, but also consumer expectations, the rise of the possible and impact investment, regulatory developments, and also workers' expectations in terms of the meaning of work, they all call for decarbonization in a more optimistic way. So in this context, the appropriation of environmental issues in connection with economic and social concerns is a vital way to really do a meaningful transition.
Great, thanks very much. Catherine, can I bring you in here? We've heard a lot about various barriers, and in fact that connects to a lot of the discussions we've been having throughout the day, so thanks a lot for making those connections to our earlier discussions as well, Louis. But Catherine, I'm also wondering if you can identify some barriers that the agency has identified in its research, or even maybe knowledge gaps that are needed for advancing on social and environmental integration in this way.
Super, thank you. I think this is a really interesting area. So if I start with some of the barriers, one that I see is around climate change. We have this very urgent need to act. You know, we have information coming out every day about how we're passing 1.5, and we really need to act urgently. And at the same time, delivering social justice requires democratic participation in decision-making, which takes time. So I see a tension there between the need to act urgently and the time taken to make it fair and deliver procedural justice. My second point relates to our very broad economic model, whereby we have delivered social progress through economic growth, and economic growth has in turn driven consumption, leading to increased resource demand and greenhouse gas emissions. We've started to decouple at European level. We've successfully decoupled from greenhouse gas emissions. Resource use is slower, but when you take our material footprint at global level into account, we haven't really decoupled. So this economic model that we're still dependent on for delivering social progress remains flawed. I don't have a solution for that, but I want to point it out. I echo Florin's point about the fact that we continue to subsidize fossil fuels, and what that means is that the market signals get confused. We need to consistently make sure that sustainable products and services are the most affordable for all, and I see this in the most recent strategy documents coming out of the Commission. Maybe a couple of other points. I think what we also see in Europe is an aging population, which means that our fiscal flexibility for finding money to invest in new initiatives, in decarbonisation, in circularity diminishes. And of course we have the competition now from the defence industry. We continue to measure investment in military industrial complex as positive GDP and growth. So I think looking beyond GDP to measure what really matters and start looking at what creates value for society can allow us to measure other dimensions of progress. And our colleagues at the Joint Research Centre have done some really interesting work on that. I'll stop there and give time to the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I think between Louis and Catherine, we have a long list of identified barriers. And I'm just wondering, Pavle, can you tell us how to overcome these, or what the European Commission can do to overcome these?
That's a very good question. In fact, you mentioned many of these barriers. Let's start with for example, financial barriers. For example, the decarbonization installations are very costly. Let me give you an example. For example, carbon capture storage of the cement factory cost for a given project €1.5 billion. It could consume the whole allocation of Just Transition Fund and the whole allocation for the given country. That's why we need combination of either to increase the budget for decarbonization, modernization fund, innovation fund, and in 1 month's time there will be the announcement of the new a financial framework which should at least increase the budget for just transition, so as was announced by our president. Another barrier, my predecessor mentioned very often inclusive aspect, representativeness aspect. We cannot discuss over the shoulders of the stakeholders about the future. So the involvement, strong involvement of stakeholders, it's a must for every single policy which has an impact on a daily basis life. So we cannot, we must implement, and we do in fact in cohesion policy. We have in the partnership principle, it's the DNA of the cohesion policy. So the strong involvement of partners, going to the most vulnerable. For example, if we have to requalify the coal miners to either another, let's say, mining jobs or surface job, we have to think also about women, because normally they are not active, because the coal miners they provide the full support, full salary so we have to activate women, and also to give opportunity to young people, because in some monocultural regions when there is only lignite mining, lignite mine and the power plant, there are not much job opportunities, so we have to create more jobs to especially the SMEs. So there are problems that could be addressed, but together with stakeholders, because they have in fact brilliant ideas on the ground. Together with them, we can really try to overcome some problems. Even for example, I would mention another problem like administrative capacity, to how to do it on the ground. For example, how to implement this project, and we see that from the small stakeholders side there is a need for support, so we can provide also expertise, we can provide the experts on the ground, we can match the for example coal mining regions to learn from each other, so we can send them, so we set up the Just Transition platform in order to help them to deploy the experts on the ground, to help them also to send the stakeholders from one region to another region to learn from each other. So, and yes, that's we should also to simplify some procedures, because, for example, in state aid we sometimes overcomplicate some issues that, for example, are difficult to notify as a state aid scheme, or let's imagine you want to requalify the steel workers in order to for example, to shift them for the more decarbonized way of producing steel. So, and the state aid procedures are limitation. They have to notify this. So, on our side also, we are thinking how to improve the state aid. So there is ongoing process of revision of the Clean Industrial Deal procedure. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to save it maybe for later, but I do have a few other questions on your engagement with communities. But I'm going to turn now to Dirk. If you would like to tell us a bit from the perspective of the ESC, how do you see the way forward in overcoming the barriers?
Before I speak on behalf of the ESC, just one remark on a rather personal one. We should stop talking about vulnerable people. We should speak about ordinary people. Because we do have a tendency that there is some 5 to 10% in this population around which has been heavily affected by all these processes, and we have to help them to get through. This is not the case. We're talking about the majority of working people with decent incomes these days that face this transition and the consequences of them. And what they do not want is to be marked as vulnerable, which they are not. I can say I'm representing, for example, the German automotive workers in that industry. You do get a decent wage, and I assume that we're here in an academic surrounding on the university level. Many people would be glad to have that kind of income. I've been working at the university myself, so I know how to compare that. We have been talking about women, which obviously make more than 50% of the population. So I think we should start talking that the policies where the thing is affecting the majority of our people, and I think we can only overcome that. And there I'm coming back to the ESC. We've just today taken up a resolution on the future work program of the European Commission, and there I think it's important that we have both. That the aspects of further investment, which is the key issue, I think, to make this transition and decarbonization happening when taking people on board. It's not the time now to discuss about alternatives to growth. I would assume, and strengthening competitiveness, and on the other hand, the question of social inclusion, strengthening of collective bargaining, getting people involved in there, because the people that actually do this transformation, these are the workers. They are setting up the windmills. They are producing the green steel. It's not an anonymous force that is doing this. They need to be involved in this process, and I think it only works if we, for this time, do not play off one against the other. Which means, in consequence, that we have to take a hell of a lot of money in our hands. There we come to the MFF. For the next period. I think we have it in the country I know best, in Germany, which was always on the very reluctant side on that, an internal debate which is now willing to do this kind of a future investment, and that seems to be clear to me that we can only overcome it if we do not play off investments, competitiveness, also resilience in our value chains, resilience when it comes to our capacity to defend ourselves with aspects of social justice.
Thank you. I'm going to, Mags, ask you a question now, and then I will open for questions from the audience. I still have a list myself of many more, but I want to make sure I'm fair to the audience to give the chance to ask questions. So, Mags, I just want to ask you if you could maybe reflect on, say, we just had a panel or a discussion earlier about the clean industrial deal, and I'm wondering from your perspective how you see these new policy strategies and how they deal with integrating social justice and environmental issues more broadly.
Yeah, thank you. I wish I could have been here for your clean industrial deal discussion. I was also discussing it this morning, but with a different band of people, so it'd be interesting to know whether the conversations overlap. I think the clean industrial deal is worthy of a lot of attention. I think it captures not just airtime, but really much of the political space at the moment, but falls quite short on social fairness issues, and I think we need to be able to join the dots to talk about that. I think we have, it's difficult to oppose the sort of competitiveness vibe that has seized Europe at the moment, but I think we need to make sure that that's held together with other important conversations, and that one thing doesn't overcome the other. So especially in terms of space in budget and in politics, I think it's quite interesting to hold together the competitiveness. I'm having problems with that word this afternoon. Competition, can I say that? Competition drive with cohesion, for example. It's very clear that member states are still very much for cohesion policy, but the clean industrial deal actually is, from what I've read, quite geographically blind at the moment and doesn't actually take any very clear steps in how we're going to analyse geographically, territorially, where the needs are, where the potentials are, where the winners and the losers are, and how we hold that together with the EU's commitment to cohesion, and also at a sort of subnational level. So what we know from the last year's 9th cohesion policy report is that, okay, we're doing okay on cohesion policy in terms of, the percentages are nudging up across the union. The gap is getting smaller east-west on some indicators. But within each country, we have this massive risk and many regions which are, seriously risking being left behind, and where does the right to stay that you mentioned come in that, and things like that. So I think the Clean Industrial Deal will benefit from some more territorial analysis, and I think that will be a very challenging conversation, especially when it comes to resources as well. I think in terms of the overall vibe, I would contest a little bit whether it's the moment to be talking about the growth paradigm or not. I would say at least, and surely, especially in the context of the Clean Industrial Deal, we need to be talking about planetary boundaries and how much material we can actually use. And maybe that's another, very good research topic, is where actually, how do we have the conversation that we don't want to have about sufficiency because it's politically unacceptable, but how do we actually bring down collectively our use of materials? Because, not just from an idealistic point of view, but there are some boundaries. I would also say that Clean Industrial Deal, with its hopes and dreams, its possible funding streams, regulations and things, needs to come with some very clear conditionalities, and that's environmental conditionalities. Everybody wants to speed up permitting, but normally it's not the environmental assessments that are the bottleneck. Normally it's the capacity issues that have already been raised. So let's be clear about what we might lose in our rush to build what we think the future to be. And social conditionalities, EU funds are very scarce. We should be using them very strategically and using them to produce good practice and multiplication. I think there's something with this microphone. But I think that means that anybody who's drawing down funds from the next European budget, the next MFF, any member state, any company, should actually be subject to very strict social conditionalities as well about the quality of their jobs, the collective bargaining. So we're actually, building this integrated social and environmentally friendly future that we have an opportunity to do, but we need to get those issues to cut through some of the other noise. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this is a wonderful moment to open up to discussion. I have 2 questions online. The first question, I think, is to you, Mags. We need to maximize synergies between mitigation and adaptation. Where and how can we do that more efficiently with greater social impact? And then a second question, maybe this is for you, Dirk, or anybody else can come in this as well. Rather than looking at vulnerability from a perspective of protection, can we try to build a stronger development narrative and focus on the human capabilities we can support actively through both social and environmental policy that are still not well aligned? Max, do you want to go first? And please don't hesitate to raise your hand.
Synergies, lots of opportunities for synergies. Partly, I think we need to get the overarching story right, and I think this is a very, if you like, a clear request that I would want to go to the highest places possible. Is the EU talks about just transition, but often in quite, okay, we've got the Just Transition Fund, we've got the Social Climate Fund, we've got Council recommendations, so okay, we're done. And we know we're just at the beginning of the story, and we don't know what's going to happen after in the next budget. We don't know whether we're going to have another Just Transition Fund or how that sort of aspect of support will appear in the MFF. We know the Social Climate Fund isn't large enough. It needed to be a lot bigger. We know that it's a difficult fight to try to get member states excited about spending. spending their ETS2 revenues on similar measures. So we've really got a long way to go. And we have now a commissioner with just transition in her title. And it would be great to have a much clearer overarching vision to say, like, this people-centred transition is really up there, that it's not just a clean industrial deal. It's a clean industrial deal for the citizens, for the regions, for the communities, for the workers, not just for the people that signed the Antwerp Declaration. So I think having a vision and an overall, overarching, stronger just transition. We've been asking for a framework. What does that mean? Is it realistic? But at least something that ties together the commitment would be really useful. And then to embed it in all the things that we've got going on, but we know we need to keep strengthening and improving. So the NECPs is a great place where mitigation and adaptation efforts can come together. The long-term strategies, we're going to be talking about the governance regulation in the next year. How do we do this planning that pulls together all our collective efforts? And I think just a word of caution. I know it's not easy. It's super difficult. It's very difficult to do it well. It's very difficult to have that stakeholder engagement at a level that we ask for so often, but which is necessary to really get it inclusive and to get it right. And I think our dilemma, I think collectively, especially here in this room, is we know that we also want simplification. We want this stuff to go faster and easier, and we want it to be more, acceptable to everybody. We want it to work more smoothly. But a lot of the things that we need to happen risk being perceived as complications. We need more research. We need more socio-economic distributional impact assessment. Otherwise, we don't know whether we're getting the policies right across the board or not. And how we hold those two things together to be able to say, we need this data, we need these chats, we need to talk about it. In the end, it's going to make us more cost effective, more inclusive, more fair, more democratic. Those things are very difficult to hold together. So please let us know when you have the answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Dirk, would you like to respond on this idea of moving from looking at vulnerability from the perspective of protection to stronger development narrative?
Yes, I give a try. I think in the past and also currently we are a bit looking too much on the actors or the employees out in this world, in this Europe, to be the object of this transition process. It's something that is being imposed on them, rather than them enabling to be the actor. And I do not think that this really reflects the reality, because I think the reality is that the workers are actors in this process. It's been in many, many cases where we've been proactively demanding companies to change, to invest into the future, which is from a climate perspective important, also for workers, because we all live on the same planet, I guess. But it's also, of course, important from the perspective of a future technology, because we all know that in the future, any kind of industrial production that wants to have a future needs to be decarbonized. And this is a perspective that workers have and that we have been actively demanding for companies and its management for years and years. So I think we need also in a political point of view this shift that these are not objects that you have to treat, but these are rather the actors in this process, and you can see where you can enable them to be even a stronger actor. And I think this is also important when we come to the diverse political instruments that we have at hand, to make clearer to the people what this all is for. And there, of course, we are when we come to the reform of the state aid rules. It has to go hand in hand with social conditionalities. You have to tell people, okay, we're going to spend a hell of a lot of money, which is partly taxpayers' money, that is by the end being not paid by the rich, but by ordinary people. When we look at our tax systems, we have to give them perspective, okay, if we spend this money, this will bring concretely new jobs. And we also have to see a little bit on the instruments, and there I'm a bit skeptical, for example, when we come to the discussion on the ETS2, as it is being currently designed, that compensating only by social climate fund might not be enough, because that also puts a little bit the consumers in that way, not the workers, the consumers in a position of being the object of this kind of transition, of being a vulnerable person. And if we want to have the support, and we see this support is vanishing, it's vanishing not only in the European Union, it's vanishing all over in this world. I think we need a new impetus on that. I think that might be trying to give an answer to this question.
Thank you very much. I think some of these questions are also quite complicated, so it's great that you're able to answer. I think it was Alice first, and then Annalisa and Dermot. We have 3 questions so far from the room. Any other questions? And another one there. Okay. Can we take 3 or 4 together, and then we'll give a round to the panel to answer. So Alice, go ahead.
Thank you so much for this. And, it's interesting because I had several questions come up in my head as the conversation went along, and then somebody would address it. So that's like a really great thing. But one thing that I think was sort of talked around but not talked about maybe is that, we have a lot of investment and a lot of time going into this type of innovation that increases efficiency. And that makes us more competitive. But there's a natural tension there between this sort of efficiency and jobs and, keeping people able to pay for things. And so, you have that tension between the innovation and the and efficiency and keeping people feeling like they can be employed, and then also the tension in each of our lives between wanting less expensive things so that we can survive and wanting to be paid a decent wage. So I'm just wondering if you could address that in terms of the justice considerations in there.
I thank Matt for talking about the D word, degrowth, because personally, and I don't think it's only my opinion, it's coming, whether we like it or not, so we might as well tackle it openly. So I would like to hear what the rest of the panel thinks about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Dermot.
Thanks very much. Dermot Torney, Dublin City University. I'm a member of the Just Transition Commission of Ireland that was appointed last autumn, and in fact we just published our first report yesterday. And one of the key messages that we emphasised in the report was that on the one hand we see our role as being the public voice for just transition, so kind of amplifying just transition messages in policy making, but also that we see ourselves, and it's not a great analogy, but as the public ear, by which for just transition, by which we mean we don't see ourselves as the experts, the all-knowing experts who define what just transition is, but, and I wanted to amplify your message, Dirk, that we want to hear from affected communities, from workers, from communities around Ireland about what just transition means to them. So it's a comment rather than a question, but it's a call for humility on the part of all of us, that none of us has the power or the right to define what just transition is. We need to listen to affected communities and stakeholders. Thanks.
Thanks. And then behind you, no, other side. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Actually, mine is a bit of not necessarily a provocation, but we have been talking about embedding this social justice element and social policy consideration in the energy, climate, sustainability transition, and so on. And I think that's quite a recurring theme. But also based on what we were discussing, and the very interesting discussion we had, I think there is also, it can be interesting to look at the issue from the other way around. Let's say, I work myself in energy efficiency policy, and there is this big issue about energy poverty now that is part of it, also the social climate fund. And one of the issues, that, like the resistances that were met, was about, okay, energy poverty is not a thing, it's poverty, and energy is a different part of it. So why are we addressing this stuff? And I think maybe it can be interesting, and that's what I want to hear your take on, is rather than thinking just in terms of how to embed social considerations into climate and energy transition, sustainability transition policies, the other way around, to look at how to embed climate consideration in social policy, because there is no social policy without at the point we are now, and there is no social policy without taking climate into account. And so maybe, of course, probably the answer is in the middle, it's in integrating both, but this latter aspect is a bit less talked about maybe, and so that's it.
Thanks. Okay, so we are officially out of time, but Teresa has given me a few extra minutes. We're going to use them. Thank you. So we have like 3-4 questions, comments. Maybe Louis, I'll call on you first, because I think the last question is exactly what your research is about. So thinking about environmental and sustainability issues in social policy. So perhaps you could reflect on that one. And then I will turn to Pavle and Catherine next. You can choose your questions, and Mags and Dirk, you already answered some, but I'm going to give you the chance to answer whichever you want as well. So Louis first.
Yes, I'll be very brief.
With your microphone, please. Thank you.
Yes, I'll be very brief. Yes, exactly. The question of the reverse approach to the question of integrating environment within social policy or economic policy. It's another interesting way to look at it. I think for social policy, in terms of energy, for example, or housing or whatever, a lot of the time what we see that there are synergies in terms of helping people insulate their homes, then it decreases the energy needs, and so of course energy poverty. So I think we need to look towards synergies first, and then otherwise there's the issue of compensation, as we discussed, for example, with the social climate fund, etc. So that would be one way to integrate. And just another word on integrating, not in social policy but in economic policy or industrial policy. I think we touched upon the just industrial deal, clean industrial deal. I think, and that might be over optimistic, but because the momentum is not towards increased social or environmental issues, but opening the black box of industrial policy might be an opportunity to distill social or environmental criteria within the economic engine or the industrial policy. So that might be another optimistic perspective, but yeah. As the black box is open now, I think there might be opportunities to seize for integration of the different policy goals that we have.
Thank you. Catherine, can I turn to you next? Would you like to respond to any of the other questions on the trade-offs between efficiency and cheap products and good wage, and perhaps addressing also degrowth, what we think about that, if you want?
Super. Yes, thanks. So on the first question, I think it's really interesting to highlight this tension between competitiveness in terms of efficiency, and it's essentially the price and the fair livelihood. And I think there are ideas in the policy framework. We have the state aid framework that should support change, so channeling investment into change so that doesn't have to be then reflected in the overall cost of the goods. There's also efforts to boost demand for clean tech through public procurement, and also I can't emphasize enough the importance of doing away with fossil fuel subsidies as a means of evening out pricing. And I fully agree with you that sustainable products need to be the cheaper products and accessible to people. And I think eliminating fossil fuels is a step towards that. But I also think that Europe has to act with courage to be a first mover and make sure that this is a race to the top, a race towards sustainability, and that we don't fall into this trap of a race to the bottom, as we see, for example, the US pulling away from some of these more progressive ambitions. Quickly on degrowth, the point that I made was that we do see decoupling of greenhouse gas emissions from economic growth. So we successfully in Europe cut our carbon emissions while seeing growth. So that's to be celebrated. That's a good thing. But our resource consumption has remained relatively stable, and at global level it continues to go up. So this question of how we respond economically and find the resources to invest in decarbonisation is a challenging one that I'm afraid I don't have the answer to. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Pavle, would you like to come in?
Yes. As regards the question about what is the just transition, how to implement, in fact, it's we started from the concept and then we try to implement through the just transition mechanism, just transition fund, and it's learning by doing for the Commission, for the stakeholders. So we for example, for peat extraction in Ireland, we also try to find the good examples to inspire the Irish stakeholders. So we try to match them with the Finnish regions to learn from each other. How does it work in practice? So basically, it's learning, but from the best examples. So I would say, as regards the mechanism itself, it's also a question of adjustment. We also discussed within the working group with stakeholders how to adjust this mechanism in the future in order to be responsive and adapt and more flexible as regards, for example, the thematic scope or the different rules that are quite strict compared to the other funding. So it's really the evolving. We are now in the process of revision of the regulation of the Just Transition Fund, in order also to adapt to midterm review priorities like affordable housing or the step in industries. So basically, it's a moving target, and we are happy to learn from the mistakes, and also we are about to publish also the evaluation of the midterm evaluation of Just Transition Fund, also to learn from this lessons that we had, because it's a completely new instrument embedded in the cohesion policy. So it's a learning process for all of us, for stakeholders, for the Commission also.
Thank you. We're completely out of time. So, Mags, do you have something to say that will only take 5 seconds?
Absolutely. I always have something to say.
Excellent.
I'm worried about misrepresenting my organisation's position. So instead of degrowth, which I don't think I actually said, I would say, and it also partly answers your question, well-being economy, and what's it all about, and are we risking slipping into models where people serve economic goals rather than the economy is designed as a well-being framework. So I think that's a useful thought. I think very much defining what just transition is has to be done on a very specific case-by-case basis with all our ears open. And the word that I had at the top of my notes page, which I haven't actually managed to say yet this afternoon, is local. And we're wrestling with how the EU does just transition, but we should never forget that actually most of, not just the impacts, but most of the energy and the change and the innovation is actually happening at a local level, and we should find more innovative ways to draw upon that. Thank you.
Thank you. Dirk, 5 seconds.
A very short circular economy. I think this is one of the key issues when we talk about efficiency, and also gives a little bit of an answer to the degrowth. I think we are only there at the very beginning, and there's a hell of a lot of work in the ESC being done on circular economy, which would be out of any time limit. So I'm refraining that on that. And the question of no social policy without taking climate policy on board was a key issue that we had in our discussion on just transition. I can tell in this surrounding was a hard discussion we had among the 3 different groups with the different interests. But I think it's one of the key aspects, obviously, that you have to take climate change in a broader sense also into social policies.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your engagement right till the end. Please join me in thanking our excellent panellists for this discussion today. Back to you.